So at the end of this, I guess my important takeaway for all of this is I think that it is crucial not to moralize our economic systems. I think that when you start to moralize economic systems, what you forget is that an economic system is merely a tool. I don't want to ask a question of like, is a hammer good or evil? I want to ask, like, what is the best type of nail that you can hit with a particular hammer? When you begin to point out whether or not a particular economic system is in and of itself good or evil, then you lose sight of what economies are supposed to do, which is efficiently allocate capital or natural resources in ways that make a country as prosperous as possible. I do agree with Richard Wolff and probably with every socialist or every left-leaning person around the world that there are a ton of problems that exist in the Western world, and more specifically in the United States today, relating to things like inequality, social justice, lack of access to things like healthcare or education or basic things like food stamps or shelter or other like basic necessities. I just don't see how a socialist society solves literally any of these things. And I don't feel like I've ever been given an adequate explanation by any socialist for how they would organize their society. Usually these arguments are incredibly amorphous or vague, such that literally everything is socialism. Like you can still have private enterprise and co-ops and the government does some things and voila, that's socialism, which just sounds like liberalism to me with government intervention, which is liberalism. Or they try to make arguments for more strict forms of socialism. But I think that it's hard to get them to admit that in those stricter forms of socialism, they would disallow things like private investment. And I guess it bothers me because so many innovations and things have existed only under the framework of capitalism that even with public research and public pushing, you weren't able to get. For instance, I believe the LED was discovered or was invented in Russia like 100 years ago. And it wasn't until Western private enterprise took a hold of that invention and started utilizing it that anybody was able to actually enjoy the invention.
All right, thank you. And now Professor Wolff, closing statements. You have 3 minutes.
Sure. I think it's very hard for people to break out of the straitjacket that capitalism, having existed for 300 years, imposes on us, often unconsciously, often through the medium of our parents, our teachers, and so forth. I respect that. That's difficult. Human beings have a hard time doing that. I'm included. But I think that what is unique here is that all those problems of American capitalism that Steve just listed, the difference is whether you see those as distinct problems that you, as a good liberal, think that the government could address or that some institutional adjustment could address. People who have looked at the inequalities, the instability, the injustices of capitalism have tried that for a long time. And it doesn't work. The fact of the matter is we have more inequality now than we had 10, 40, and 60 years ago. That's the system that we live in. It's as though what the liberal does is look for every possible explanation other than that the basic system is the problem and system change is the solution. And one last effort to clarify, since it seems murky for Steve. The difference I advocate is a radical transformation of the workplace so that the person who comes to work is no longer overwhelmingly an employee, a drone, told where to sit and what to do with what machine on what occasion, and then at the end of the day is told, go home. What happens to what you helped to produce is none of your business. That transforming that into a collective community that democratically decides so that every worker has 2 job descriptions, the particular task and your equal participation in running, designing, and organizing the enterprise. That is a liberation of human capability. It is a transformation of life from the bottom up and represents a kind of socialism which, were it to be achieved, would be a control on the government so it does what the people need and not get shifted off to other things that sustain the state as against the people. That's a lesson learned from the earlier socialisms that the newer socialisms have incorporated. The mass of people will determine, as capitalism, especially in the United States, declines, whether, when, and how to move forward. But the yearning to do better than we're doing in U.S. capitalism, that's already a fact. It's now only a question where it'll go. The very fact that this conversation is happening and that someone like me was invited to participate is itself a sign of where things are going.